Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 201. I'm delighted to be joined on the podcast today by sports scientist Jose Maria Oliva. Jose, how are you?
Hi, how are you? Nice to meet you.
You too. How are things?
Very good.
Good. Well, Jose, we always start the podcast in the same way. So it'd be great to find out a bit more about you and what you've done previously, but also what you're doing currently. So can you give a little bit of a rundown for the listeners on your career so far?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this podcast. I'm very happy to be here with you. I studied the bachelor's degree in exercise and sports sciences at the University of Almeria, which is my hometown. Then I completed my master's degree in research and in science, in exercise and sports sciences. And then I completed my PhD about the analysis of physical performance in professional soccer players. So this is my main academic background. I have also been working for different clubs, different sports centers, different sports, basketball, soccer. I have also worked for manufacturers of performance tracking systems, such as video track systems. And I have been recently working for a professional soccer club, specifically in the under-19 team. And this is the Unión Deportiva Almería, which is my hometown team. And also, I work as a lecturer and researcher at the University of Almeria right now. So this is my main background, all related to the sports sciences.
Brilliant. So how is your time split up at the moment? Is it majority at the university or at the club, or how does that work?
Well, during the preseason, I spend most of the time with the team, but my full-time role is at the university. So.
Brilliant. And you also didn't mention about the book, so you wrote a book as well?
Sure, yeah. I wrote a book about the sports scientist and the load monitoring in the context of team sports, specifically using electronic performance tracking systems. The book is written in Spanish. I'm working on the translation to English, but this is a pretty new topic, not new, but trendy, and I'm trying to work on the project on English as well.
So what was the main drive and reasons for writing the book?
Yeah, so when I was working for this manufacturer of performance tracking systems, I learned a lot about the use of inertia sensors, the use of GPS technology, the use of local positioning systems to collect data in the context of sports. When you work for this kind of companies, your perspective changes, because when you are a practitioner, you don't see many of the things that you see when you are working inside the company that creates the products and develops all the sensors, the platforms, the reports that everyone sees. Basically, when you are a practitioner, a coach, you just try to download your reports to see the distance that you cover, the sprints that you get. But in the end, we need to understand much more than that. So in the book, I talk about all the electronic performance tracking systems that we have to date. For example, inertia sensors, that this can be combined with GPS, the local positioning systems, the advantages and the disadvantages of using this kind of technologies. Why should I use GPS, or why? What is the advantage of using a video tracking system? For example, in video tracking, we don't need to wear any system, like you don't need to wear any chest vest. It's just the cameras that record your movement. So every system has the advantages and disadvantages, and I try to analyze all of them. Also, I try to explain the reports that we can get, daily reports, summary reports, which kind of variables should we focus to select, which kind of reports in terms of evolution reports, why should I understand the use of set score as a measure of variability in the context of training. So this is the kind of information that I talk, and also I mention the role of the sport scientist, because typically we understand the sport scientist now as a person who is using GPS or something like that, but it's not only that. I mean, the sport scientist is a highly qualified person who has a knowledge of sports sciences, who knows how to conduct research, who knows how to apply the scientific method to answer any question that we have in our daily basis in the context of sports. So this person is not only the one who collects the data and gives the coach a report. It's a person who does so many things, and I think the role of this position is essential. Basically, that's the content of the book, and I think it's quite not novel, but it's trendy, and I think people would like to know about it.
Yeah, it's really interesting what you're saying there around the sort of views that a practitioner in a club would see maybe differently to someone external, because maybe you're taking away certain biases or even emotion, I suppose, sometimes working with those players, aren't you? And you are literally looking at the data involved. And then also what you mentioned about advising on what data to select and use. And that is something we've talked about a lot on here. So what's your strategy for that? What is that led by? Like, is it from the game model, or are there other aspects that you're looking at that actually determine what to focus on and what to not focus on as much?
Well, this is a very interesting question. In the end, this is my approach to performance tracking. I consider that this person needs to be a qualified person for this purpose, because typically the strength and conditioning coach is the one who also collects the data and gets the reports, you cannot do everything because it's a very specific position, and my approach is that first we need to be qualified, we need to understand what we are analyzing, we need to set specific aims, starting with what did the player do during the session, what is the response to that load for each player, because we are going to have an individualized response to a similar stimuli. Two players have a completely different internal response. So trying to understand those two questions is key. Also, trying to understand how is the player coping with the load in terms of perceptual well-being, and then analyze if the player is ready to train and compete. And here is where all the subjective monitoring tools, the GPS data is useful, because we can understand the load from each day. We can understand the training and match demands. We can understand the specific demands that we are stimulating during a specific task. For example, during transition games, we know that we are going to focus on high-speed running actions. That if we reduce the size of the games, we can increase the accelerations. So this is my approach in how I try to understand the data and and the knowledge that I have, I think it's of interest to keep moving forward in terms of understanding the athlete monitoring.
And in terms of performance tracking, I know it's an area we wanted to touch on and go into a bit of detail with. So what's your approach to that?
Yeah, so I think that daily monitoring is essential. As I said, trying to understand what the player did and how the player is responding to that load and coping with the load in terms of well-being. But there are many ways to see this approach to performance tracking, and for example, we can design a specific training drills focus on the match demands, but we cannot only consider the average demands. In my approach, the average demands are not as important as many people are talking about that. I think that analyzing not the worst case scenarios, but the peak locomotor demands periods, and we have a recent study in which we mentioned that we spend a lot of time above the 90-minute average demands. For example, this study that was conducted with a colleague from Italy, Andrea Rivoli, he has experience in this content, and we showed that the 90-minute average demands represented 53% of the total distance, 16% of the high-speed running distance, or 20 to 23% of the sprinting distance. So in the end, we need to focus much more above the average demands. And this is something that I try to do during the training sessions. For example, we try to design this based on the worst case scenario. I don't like talking about the worst case scenario concept. I used to do it, but now if you read a little bit, you can see that the worst case scenario is not as real as we think, because in the end, we have the worst case scenario of total distance, the worst case scenario of high sprint distance or accelerations, but a worst case scenario is not a unique period of the session of distance cover. It's the unique period of the session in which you have high intensity accelerations, high sprinting distance, a lot of distance cover. So this is how I see that we should try to understand the performance.
And with everything we're collecting as well, in terms of reliability, validity, and knowing what to use and not to what to disregard, but what to focus on, like what's your views on that, and maybe advice for people as well in terms of when they are trying to implement something new into their programming?
Well, I would say that first, understand the data that we get. Is this data valid? Is the source that we are using to collect the data reliable? This is very important. We have a study which has been published in the Science and Medicine Football Journal, and we discuss the quality of the data that we get. I mean, not specifically the quality of the data, but FIFA is conducting a research study to suggest which kind of tools or GPS or local positioning systems, optical tracking systems, which kind of tools are valid and reliable to collect position and speed, which are the basics of monitoring today. So this is a very, very cool project, and the quality of the project is good. But in this study, we analyzed how they are reporting the information. For example, if I am a practitioner and I want to buy a GPS, I cannot go to the reports, find the one with the best scores, and then buy it. That's not a good approach. Why? Because every device, every GPS from each company has been analyzed in different conditions. Why different? Because if I am a GPS company and my GPS is tested in one side of the pitch, and then another GPS device is analyzed in a different side of the pitch, this is I would say that this is not, it's not about the validity, it's about the comparison. You cannot compare between one GPS and another because the conditions in which these were tested were not the same. Also, if we are a GPS company and my participants do 3 different drills, and then when I go with the second GPS company, they do different drills compared to my drills. We cannot compare the data from each reports. Maybe the one GPS has got better results, but they could have kids under 12 years old that couldn't reach high-speed running actions. And then the greater the speed, usually we get more error when we are analyzing the data. So what we say in this study is that we need to be careful about the information that we manage to analyze the data, to buy a GPS or a local positioning system for our team. So that's something important to consider. And then another approach is that we should try to keep it as simple as possible. Once we have the data, once we know that we are using right tools, then keep it as simple as possible. Try to collect what you can collect. Try to analyze subjective measures combined with objective measures, and don't get lost in the thousands and thousands of variables that you are going to get. So that's, try to keep it as simple as possible. That would be my advice.
Because that's easily done, isn't it? There's so many sets of data that we could end up with that you can kind of get lost in the weeds a little bit and not know where to focus your energy. So what was your approach going into the club that you are working with as well, Jose, in terms of data collection and what you're using? Can you talk about that in terms of why you maybe focus on certain areas?
Yeah, we have changed a little bit from last year to this year, but I always say that collecting subjective measures is something that everyone can do. I try to teach my players the importance of giving the real answer. I try to avoid the fear to not to play on Saturday or Sunday. Try to remember that this information is going to be important for us to make decisions, to have them be available for the coach. And once I do that, I submit every questionnaire after the session and before the session. After the session, I send an RPE questionnaire. And before the session, every morning, I send a wellness questionnaire to analyze mood, sleep quality, delay onset muscle soreness, and the level of stress that they have. And specifically, if they have any problem, if they are sick, then I also have an open question to talk about that. That's the basics: subjective information, subjective monitoring. And then I use some GPS data for the daily basis. We have hundreds of variables, but the main variables that I select are distance, high speed running distance, high intensity accelerations, high intensity decelerations, about 3 meters per second square, high metabolic load distance, and then I combine this with the RPE, which is uploaded to the platform. So these are the main variables that I use. And if I am analyzing specific drills, I don't consider the whole distance. I consider distance per minute, and I try to do all the editing of the drills as good as possible, to make sure that I am analyzing effective training data.
And what about presenting that data as well, whether that be to players, coaches, even fellow sports scientists or sort of medical coaches? Like, how would you go about that? And is there some stuff that you do present and also stuff that you hold back just for yourself?
Since I use this GPS device, this is uploaded to the software, which is SPRO. SPRO uploads it to WimCloud. So in the PDS Cloud, we have ready to use or ready to print reports. We have also some dashboards, but right now, since we just started using this kind of technology, I'm using the daily reports, simple reports, and task reports. At the end of the microcycle, I also see the evolution of the load in the microcycle and try to give the coach an idea of players who have more load, less load, and yeah, this is how I try to do it. I think that I can do much more, but we are just starting. And as I said in the very beginning, I don't want to get lost. I know quite well this system because I work for this company, but I think I need to keep it simple and try to don't get lost in the data.
And from the coach's perspective, I know every coach can be a little bit different in terms of what they want to see, whether they want a detailed report or maybe it's just a conversation. From your point of view, like, has your coach, have they wanted something printing out? Like, what's the sort of approach you take with them? What have they requested from you?
This year, or the coach, all he wants is to know a little bit what happened in the session. I explain him what the players did and how they respond to this load in terms of the RPE. But I don't have to print the reports every day. And indeed, I think that today we are using this kind of technologies with clouds, and we don't need to print a report to show anything. Like, if we want to talk a little bit about something, we just go into the report online and we discuss it. So I think that this data is also useful to interact with the coach. For example, I remember one of the first weeks of preseason, we designed a training task. And when I was seeing the task, I was a little bit afraid. I mean, I was saying, we are doing something wrong. Sometimes you make mistakes, right? And you don't design the task as you wanted to do it. And they were doing so many accelerations, high intensity actions. And when I saw the coach, the report, I told the coach, hey coach, please, let's see this data, and we need to keep this in mind because it was too much load. And I think that we should have reduced it. And indeed, we should have made a decision during the training session, maybe, but we let it go. And this data help us to analyze it and say, okay, yes, we were right. These data are very high. Maybe we should try to avoid it this kind of day during the week. So this is how we can use this kind of information.
And I know you talked about, I know said you didn't like the phrase, but what kind of worst case scenario and how that is split up into everything you talked about before, whether it's distance covered, accelerations, or all the different aspects of it. How would that then inform your programming? So if we're taking this in mind that players are potentially going to have this worst case scenario, how does that inform what you do with the players?
Well, data is very useful. In the end, it's just you need to sit down and try to understand everything you get. The worst case scenarios are not easy to train. Why? Because the worst case scenario, I would say, is first of all an unpredictable situation, something that you cannot predict when it's going to happen. If it's going to happen in the first 10 minutes of the match, or if it's going to happen in the last 5 minutes of the match. So, based on that, we try to design specific drills and a lot of transition games, a lot of small silent games in which we create a disadvantage for the defense so that they need to be more physically demanded. And or for example, we tell a player, if you give 5 passes, the midfielder needs to go to the corner and come back to generate that disadvantage. So this is how we try to collect the data and try to analyze the training drills that we design.
Brilliant. And the other area we wanted to talk about, I know it's a bit of a change in topic, but I know something you've done research around is around contextual speed work. And again, it's an area we've spoke about quite a lot on the podcast. So with your research, where's that focused initially? Where's the research? What has the research been on?
Well, this is one of the projects that I like the most right now. When I started doing research, as a person who works in the academia, all I wanted to do was publish and publish. But in the end, you understand that you need to keep a practical perspective, and when you try to do practical research, then the results are more interesting. So in this study, well, we have different studies, but the main study that we have is that we try to understand when and how the players sprint in professional soccer matches. So we can see that players usually sprint in the first stages of the match, for example, in the first 15 minutes. But also we can see very high amounts of sprints in the last phases of the match, in the last 15 minutes of the match. Also, we have seen that the players who never sprint linearly. It's very strange to sprint linearly. They do never sprint from 0 speeds, and we design a lot of sprinting drills from stop. Like we are 1, 2, 3, go, right? And this is something that it's not real. It's important to train. Okay, it's important to train, but it's not the real sprint action in soccer. Also, we saw that these actions are usually not performed with the ball; these are without the ball, and this depends a lot on the position. Like, for example, the purpose of each sprint is different based on the position. If I am a forward or a wide midfielder, my sprinting actions are going to be more related to breaking the box, running behind, to run a channel to exploit space. So this is completely different to the sprint of a central defender. Central defender is going to be more focused on interceptions, on recovery runs, or the ball is over the top and I need to run back to my goal. So this is different, and I think that if we keep this perspective during the training sessions, that's also important. I'm not saying that we need to program sprinting actions only with the ball and I mean the context of the game, but it's important to train the sprinting actions as they happen during the course of the match. Again, I say this doesn't mean I don't need to perform sprinting actions, 30 meters sprints from zero speed. No, we need to do it. But if we combine this with contextualized sprinting, then this is highly recommendable. Highly recommended.
Because surely that's just adding to the toolbox, isn't it? You've got then the ability to sprint linearly and from a standing start, for example, like we talked about, but then also we've got the more contextual side of things where you're sprinting from a jog or a back pedal or however it is. That's surely the case, isn't it? That we've got that full spectrum, full toolbox available for the player.
Sure. I mean, I think I've never seen a training session designed for this purpose, like for contextualized sprinting. I'm sure that many people do it over the world, but not many people pay attention to this. These actions are going to occur in 11-a-side game, 10-a-side game, in a training session. But if we are in a day of the microcycle in which we are going to focus on sprint, we can also design this kind of games or strategies to perform contextualized sprinting actions.
I suppose the other side of it, Jose, is that these actions and these occurrences are real game-changing moments, aren't they? Because some of the things that you've talked about there, like, for example, a centre-back having a ball clipped over the top and having to be on the half term, that's essentially goal opportunities, isn't it? So these are the times that are real game-changing moments.
One of the things that we would like to understand also, we didn't analyze yet, is the more context behind the action. For sure, there is a lot to analyze. This is very complex. We try to keep it simple, but it's not as simple as we can imagine. All we can say is that the sprints that the central defenders do are completely different to the sprints that the forward is doing. And same for the midfielders, same for the fullbacks. For example, the fullback has a lot of space to run, and they may get longer distances. In our study, we showed that the sprints are from 30 to 55 meters on average, and the maximum speed that they get is between that range of 30, 33 kilometers per hour. And but this depends a lot on the purpose of the action, on the context, on it's very, there's a lot of variability in these actions.
And then with that data, and obviously more data and research to be done in that area as well, again, how does that inform practice? Does that simply come back to maybe splitting off into positions and working on these contextual movements and contextual drills that are created from that? Or how does that then work?
Sure. We use it, we can use it to design these training strategies. For example, I have not implemented a lot of strategies about the contextualized sprinting until I completed this research and I started to try a little bit how we could use it for different positions. We should work with separate groups in the session, but we don't know too much about sprinting, contextualizing sprinting today. This can be surprising, but it's real. I think it's one of the first studies and trying to understand this context. And there are some researchers also in the UK. They have done previous works, previous years, but we don't know, for example, what happens with youth levels, and what happens with female players, and this needs also to be investigated. And or for example, how is the referee going to perform a high intensity action? So there are lots of things to keep investigating and try to give practical information, not only to the coach but also to the referees, the players, and other researchers.
Yeah, brilliant. It's a really exciting area, isn't it? Because that can be really impactful for the game as well. Jose, have you got anything else to add on anything that we've touched on so far?
It's fine. It's going well.
Perfect. Well, if you're happy, then we'll move on to some of the quick fire questions that we finished the podcast with. First of which is, I always ask, who have been some of the biggest influences on your career so far?
Well, first of all, my family has always supported me and got me into sports when I was very young. Specifically, my dad, very inspiring because he was a professional soccer player, and he, I was always in the training sessions, and I knew I wanted to do something like that, and that was very very inspiring. But then in real professional career, my PhD supervisor has been very influential, and of course working with this company that I told you gave me a huge perspective about performance tracking. And so all people, all workers, employees working there, I learned a lot from them because I work with engineers, software engineers, the people who design the device. Why should it be bigger or smaller, and why should we place the antennas for the local positioning systems in one place or another? So all the people also from the sports science department, and it gives you a big perspective about what you are doing. So I would say these are the main groups of people that have influenced me.
Brilliant. And what would you say your biggest strength is as a sports scientist, a practitioner?
Well, I always try to do my job the best I can. But one of the things that I think is very good for me is that when I have a target, when I have a specific aim, I I know how to put all my resources, my tools, my skills to achieve that goal. If it's time, if it's not only my professional time, but also time from my personal life, I have a lot of dedication to what I'm doing, and that's something that I really like, and I think it works. It works.
Jose, the next one is, I always ask about what advice you give to your younger self. So if you were to go back, maybe just starting out, just getting qualified, like literally looking for the first opportunity, what would be the top bit of maybe career advice for yourself?
Well, I have always been a person who wanted to get quick and faster to where I wanted to go. So I would say that don't get desperate, and, and just enjoy what you are doing, and put all your effort on that task. And if you do it well in the future, something else is waiting for you. So just try to enjoy what you are doing, and don't get desperate.
Great bit of advice. And then the final one, I always ask about CPD or continued learning, or how you essentially keep evolving as a practitioner. You've obviously got a lot of research going on yourself, so I'm sure that is one area that you're constantly learning. But is there anything else, like how else do you continually improve?
Well, listening to podcasts is one of the best ways I use. Also, reading articles, books, not only from sports science but also other disciplines. Try to understand that if you talk with another practitioner, it's also an opportunity to learn. And going to conferences, participating in national and international conferences, this is great because you can keep up to date and know what's going on. So I don't like to do promotion, but I was recently in the Soccer and Science Congress in Coimbra, and I learned a lot of things there because many people were talking about different things, different topics, and that was really useful. And also, if I think that if there is any certification or any course that I like and it's gonna be useful, I try to do it.
Brilliant. You mentioned there, just an extension of that question, you mentioned about the books and looking into not just sort of sports science books, but what else, what other topics do you read around? And have you got any recommendations, any book recommendations?
I read a lot of books related to motivation. And as a practitioner, I think that you need to be happy, you need to be motivated, and reading from this kind of books is very helpful and very inspiring to keep moving forward.
Is there any recommendations, any that stand out for you?
I have some in Spanish. To be honest, this kind of books I read in Spanish. One of the books that I have recently read in English, really good from sports science, is the National Strength and Conditioning Association Essentials of Sports Science. It's really recommended, and I really like it.
Brilliant. Well, Jose, it was great to have you on the podcast. Thank you very much for doing it. Where would you direct people if they want to stay in touch with you, they want to keep up to date with the research you've got going on? Like, where would you direct people?
Well, I also try to be very active in social media. So I encourage people to follow my accounts on Twitter. It's JM Oliva Lozano. That's my last name. Also on Instagram, JM Oliva Lozano, Sports Science, and also on LinkedIn and ResearchGate. So I would recommend people to see what I post, because I try to do a lot of transference of knowledge, and it's working now. I really like the interaction with the people.
Well, brilliant. Jose, thank you very much. Thank you for giving up your time.
Thank you very much. It was a great time with you.